There's a Rumi quote that says, "The wound is where the light gets in." And that really, in essence means that when we are cracked open, then the light within us can start to express forward. It's almost like we become kind of encrusted, through this journey of life. And as we have different experiences, these cracks is what starts to really kind of reduce our ego and then allows our soul shine to come forth. And in essence, that's what grief is. Grief is this force, this experience that is unlike really any other, because it is one that really kind of rattles us to our core. It completely guts us at times, and it is something that we have absolutely no control over. And if one of the constants in this experience of life is that we all are going to die at some point, which means that we are all at some point going to be in an experience of grief, because we live with other people and with other beings. So it's not just, our own kind of death that's imminent, although that is one of the things that grief can actually definitely trigger for us, or start to kind of bring up questions about our mortality. Sometimes we can go into an existential kind of dark night of the soul. Most times we do go through a dark night of the soul when we're dealing with grief. And that's why in this episode, welcome, we are going to talk a little bit about and explore a little bit about how to navigate through grief and why grief is such a sacred journey. And it's one that's actually really complex, because there's this basic, there's more stages kind of coming forth now, but generally the original foundational stages of grief were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. When the reality is, yes, we can go through all those stages, but we might not. And we might go through completely different things, and we might go through stages multiple times out of order. And the thing is with grief, because it's so complex, it's a unique, very unique, individual experience that we really kind of go in and experience ourselves within ourselves. We can have people around us and support us, but when we're truly in grief, it's something that we and only us individually at that time can go through. And it is one of those passages that we just have to go through it. There's a lot of grace, though, in grief. And what that means is that when we are going through grief, we have a lot more available spiritual support. It's almost like, especially depending on the level of the depth of the grief, there's a specific container that's kind of in essence automatically already set up. And that's why sometimes you can look back and just be like, I don't even know how I managed through that. Or I during the time, you might just feel kind of not numb, but just kind of like calm. Or you might feel, just kind of even neutral about some things or accepting about things. And you're able to function through the initial stages of the shock or the trauma of the original kind of onset of whatever's the grief is that we're experiencing. And then it's after we start to kind of sometimes go into more of the depth of the emotion. So the thing with grief, I've personally, this topic of grief is probably the one that's most near and dear to me, because in this Earth School life experience, this has definitely been my PhD, I will say. I've had a lot of experiences around grief. And this is where, again, working with my own healing in this process, but also working with, many other souls, having the honor to work with many other souls on their journey of grief, is just really what's prompted this episode. And I feel like there could be many episodes on grief because it's so complex. So this is just kind of really an introduction. And the invitation, first and foremost, is whatever the grief is, which we're going to talk a little bit about the complexity of grief and what grief really can mean, is really just allowing ourselves to be in the experience we're in. That in itself can be very sometimes challenging and difficult, because either the grief isn't identified or acknowledged by the people around us or by our society, and we'll talk on some of those griefs, or it's because the people around us don't know how to handle it. Even if somebody has experienced the same grief as us, so say we have somebody that's close to us, that's passed, that's transitioned, that means still we're going to have completely different responses and a different passage, a different process of the grief. And that's because, for example, grief, when we have grief activated, that opens up. This can even happen watching a show. You know, sometimes all of a sudden you're just completely ripped open by something you saw because it's activated some type of unresolved grief that's ready to come up, clear, and release at that time. And sometimes, you know, the soul kind of navigates that. But that's also why when we do experience a grief, it opens up grief that's unresolved in our records, in our Akashic records, in our soul and subconscious kind of repertoire. So that's why sometimes you could even have, you know, an acquaintance that's transition and you're taking it harder sometimes than somebody that's really close to you, because we never know what will get activated by a specific grief, because it really depends on what gets activated at that time, which is really up to the soul. It's not something we always can know. It's kind of like what we're ready for, or what that particular grief really did activate us in regards to our soul memory. So sometimes the way somebody has passed, or how it's impacted or imprinted, you know, the people around them, sometimes is what kind of really brings up the grief for us. So invitation is just remember that there's really no playbook to grief, and there's no right or wrong to how we grieve, how long we grieve, the way that we grieve. So back to, you know, sometimes how it's hard for sometimes to give ourselves that space, because again, somebody could experience the same grief but have a very different response. The other element, and not know therefore how to kind of be with us, or they don't know what to say. Most people don't know what to say in grief, which often can be a big, if you're grieving, this can often be, you know, a really big kind of wound, often because somebody will say something that, you know, can land very inappropriately or insensitively. The reality is that most people, they want to help and they want to ease the pain and they want to comfort. But just really, to be honest, most of the time, there are no words that can comfort in grief. You know, so one of the most beautiful things I feel that we can do and have experienced is if somebody can just hold a space. If we're around somebody that's grieving, if we can just hold a space of love for them and just, really offering, I'm here for you. If there's anything that you need, when you need it, just kind of, I'm here, and just kind of like holding a space, holding a presence of love, holding a presence of compassion. Back to just, again, people around us dealing with our grief, though, sometimes people don't know how to handle grief, but sometimes they also can fear the grief, or they can fear watching us go through grief, because grief can create some pretty major fractures within our psyche, within our being. We can experience incredible despair. We can experience incredible rage. We can experience self-destruction that can come forth as part of the rage, or part of the kind of just not able to accept it, or not wanting to actually continue up for periods of time in the grief because it's so intense. That's the intensity of grief. And so sometimes people don't know how to handle that, but they also don't want to see you different. They don't want to see you be different than who they're used to you seeing. And so again, sometimes it's enough for us just to navigate ourselves when we're really truly experiencing intense grief. So this isn't about making sure anybody else is okay as we're going through grief. It's just sometimes knowing that other people aren't going to understand what we need. They're not going to understand our grief or our experience. And it's really up to us to give ourselves the space and the permission to honor what we're feeling, and to give ourselves some space to move through our emotions. And that is truly potentially one of the most powerful things that we can truly do for ourselves, is really allow ourselves to honor what it is that we're experiencing and what we're feeling. Each grief, again, is different depending on who it is. And I'm in this specific reference, I'm referencing somebody that's passed, as in death. So, how they've died, how traumatic it maybe was, or how sudden it was. Again, who is this person in relation? Is there still unresolved wounds with this person? There's so much complexity that comes up in the process of grief, and that includes the pre-grief, like the pre-death, and then the post. So, again, we never know what this classroom, what this passage, this journey of grief will bring up for us or for other. So learning again how to really take the time to support ourselves, and really just, minute by minute or hour by hour or day by day, just really asking ourselves, what do I need right now? What can I offer myself? Or, just sometimes it's just the simple things, it's just, today I'm just going to sit out in the sun for 5 minutes. Or today I'm going to just drink a little bit more water. Water helps to neutralize emotions. So water is one of the most beautiful things actually for grief. And again, it's interesting because when we are going through a deep grief, most of the things that we loved to do and that really bring us joy, oftentimes we can't. So one of the things I know for myself is that I love reading and I love cooking. And it was actually some of the intense griefs I've experienced. I would even go a couple years where I could not touch certain things. I had no interest in doing certain things. So that's not uncommon. It's not uncommon to not be able to do certain things or have no interest in it. And so again, sometimes that's just the allowing, it's just the acknowledging of, this is where I'm at, and I don't have to have all the answers right now, and I don't have to know what I need. Sometimes we don't know what we need. Still, sometimes asking ourselves what we need can just start to stir that up. But really, it's again allowing ourselves just to hold a beautiful space for ourselves while we're going through the passage of it. Because the other thing with grief is that there's a lot of griefs that are hidden. So it could be that we're grieving an animal. Sometimes the grief of an animal, if you're an animal lover, you will know sometimes dealing with the loss of an animal, it can be more gut-wrenching, heart-wrenching, and gutting than a human, because animals bring to us a sense of just absolutely unconditional love, and they're usually with us through everything in our day. They're in our home all the time. They're always around us. And so again, losing that, it's just a different kind of grief, and most of the time it's not acknowledged. So we have to go back out into our world as if nothing's happened, and there could be just this incredible grief. Like, so for example, when most people die, and that's somebody that's been really close to you, usually will be given specific grace period through your work or through society's kind of understanding and acceptance of it, as to what is the appropriate time, or giving you some time to grieve. And the reality again is there is no playbook on the time. Some griefs will grieve for a lifetime. It's not as intense, but there could be just something, depending on what this grief has brought up, that we will be kind of working through at some level. It could be a couple years before we're able to really start to move forward into different stages of acceptance, or coming into learning how to take steps back out into life, where we're really actually again engaged in life. So again, it can be so complex and unique and different. So back to griefs that aren't always acknowledged and recognized. That can include losing a body part. That can include an era that has ended. Say you're a parent and you loved the time when your children were little, and now you're all of a sudden finding yourself as an empty nester, and that could be gut-wrenching, disorienting. That's grief. It could be, again, loss of a job. It could be loss of a home. It could be loss of something from a fire, or from just from, there's so many things. There's so many griefs. The point is, the key is that there are so many griefs, and there are so many hidden griefs, and sometimes we can even be grieving and we don't know why, because it's gotten activated, and we just could feel like, I'm grieving something and I don't know why I'm grieving. So much grief is being activated currently on the planet, and is going to be continuing for a little while moving forward, because it is such a big heart opener. And the key with this is and it's interesting, right? It's called the biggest heart opener, and it feels like it's the absolute opposite, because it feels like we're the farthest thing away from being able to open our heart and feel love or feel peace. Yet that's what it does. It kind of like breaks us apart or breaks us open in a way where just new aspects of ourself or a deeper understanding starts to be able to come through. This is absolutely not recognized, acknowledged, or even claimed usually until much later after the healing of the grief occurs. So that's also an invitation too, is if you have yourself gone through some grief and you're on what you feel is on the other side of it, and you can look back and ask, what have I gained from this? Who have I become because of this? Who have I become in the sense, am I stronger? Am I able to love deeper? Am I able to have more compassion? Do I have more reverence for life because I recognize kind of the essence of it? I mean, loss itself, there's loss in so many elements of our life. So, can I still have the courage to really live life and really be able to engage in my relationships without a fear of loss? And that's one of the things, again, grief, it cracks us open, but we still have to choose, what we do with when we've been cracked open. So the invitation is keep trying to come back into your heart, keep trying to find meaning and purpose in what this is bringing up for you, because it is a part of our experience here. It's a part of our journey, and it becomes sacred truly when we're able to really acknowledge what we are gaining from it, what we have gained from it. And again, usually during the time we're not able to really retrieve anything. We're just trying to kind of get up off the floor, or we're trying to navigate through our day, or we're trying to do something with this incredible, gaping, ripping wound in our gut. So, it's just, again, trying to be as gentle and loving with ourselves, or with somebody if we're experiencing a loss with somebody else. And again, sometimes we might not understand their loss because it's not a loss we would experience. It doesn't mean we wouldn't have the same kind of event, for example, happen. We might not take it the same way. So regardless of if it's ourselves or we're kind of supporting another or with another, or sharing energy or space with another person walking this journey, it's really beautiful when we can just hold a space of gentleness and understanding and compassion, even if we ourselves would have a different experience, because again, it's so complex. We never know the complexity of what's being activated, what wounding is coming up to be healed, and the passage that person, that soul, is going through, to kind of gain that. So again, sometimes that's why it doesn't make sense that we can go through a grief and it could take us a few months, and other times it could take us literally years. So the takeaway for this is there is no playbook to grief. There's no right or wrong. Yes, there can be stages, and those stages can be very fluid and very, they can go back and forth, which means it's important that we give ourselves the grace to be able to allow however it's unfolding and the twisting, kind of winding road that comes up with grief. I could be going in one direction, then all of a sudden, I might feel like I've taken 10 steps back. Maybe not, like we learn, grow, and heal in a spiral. If we're following these stages as if we have to be in a specific order, then we'll reference it like that. And usually the experience with grief is it's not like that. It's very complex, and we experience it in many different ways, and we can go through and back and forth different stages, but it doesn't mean we're going backwards. And that includes if you're witnessing somebody going through their journey. It's something that we do pass through grief. We do pass through grief, and we are different. We are never the same after we experience a grief, especially an intense grief. So the takeaway is, kind of allow the journey to be what it is. One of the most comforting things to do during grief is to come into the present moment and breathe. Just come into the present moment and grieve, because often in grief, we're back and forth from the past to the future. Past with memories, or going over things, or coulda, woulda, shoulda, or just the memory or the loss of this person or being or experience or job or whatever it is. Or we're in the future, like, how am I gonna live without this person? What am I gonna do without this experience, without this job, without this place, without this whatever? So the invitation for us is to just keep practicing coming back into the present moment, come back into our body if we can, and just breathe. And the tip is to find something when you're ready, find something that you can do that's very bite-sized, palatable, manageable, kind of day to day. So I'll give you an example. One of the very intense griefs that I had experienced was complex in the sense that it was a very deep personal loss through death. I myself went through a near-death experience in it and had a body physical trauma at the same time. So the complexity of this grief, for example, sometimes too, just to kind of sidestep this for a second, sometimes when it's complex like this kind of grief is, when there's a couple things that you're dealing with, like, so for this example that I'm giving for myself, I also had a physical trauma, which meant that my body, I just had to deal with my body at first because it was a very significant trauma. And so I was still absolutely emotionally gutted, but I wasn't able to fully address my emotions fully until months later, once I got my body back to a place where it was stable and balanced, and I could be in my body enough that I could start to really, kind of honor what I was experiencing and moving through that. So that's an example, again, of the complexity. And this example of this grief for myself, there was a day, I remember a day, and I was lying on the floor. And I remember thinking, if I don't get up right now, I'm not ever getting up again. That's how intense and how traumatic this experience was. And I just thought to myself, I've lived, I'm here for a reason, I'm here for a purpose. So I'm going to get up, and I'm going to get up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one thing a day that I can navigate and I can manage. I first started with just doing a healthy smoothie once a day. And then I committed to myself. My background was fitness. So that was one of my daily things that I always, very, very involved in fitness. So that was something I thought, I'm going to go and I'm going to do the treadmill for 5 minutes. I made myself go out of the house to do it. So I made myself kind of, and I don't mean made myself as in I was harsh. I committed to myself out of love, out of this commitment that I was getting up off that floor. And I said, I'm going to go to the gym for 5 minutes a day. And then I'm going to come home. And if I want to cry the rest of the day, or I want to not do anything and I don't want to talk the rest of the day, I don't want to do anything, then I'm going to give myself that permission and that freedom. I am going to honor myself, though, and hold myself to that 5 minutes. And that 5 minutes was intense. And I chose to go out of the home because I needed to get out of the home, because that's the other thing with grief. It's very difficult sometimes to be social. The tendency is to isolate, and the tendency is to kind of just go within and shut down and shut off. And sometimes we do need that. We absolutely need to go within to heal, usually, and to be more silent and to be more quiet. Silence is one of the most beautiful ways to actually heal. Actually, if that ever resonates with you, even just do a day of silence, or do a couple hours a day of silence. Very healing. But that's, for me, it was kind of like, I knew I'm an introvert already anyway. So I was like, if I didn't go out into that gym, it would be even harder for me to get back out into the world again. And there's your whole nervous system is frayed too. So it's kind of like learning how to navigate with all the stimuli and, all the noises and the smells and all the people and the energies. And so again, it was kind of like very baby stepping it, but that was just an example of what I chose to do. And then I built on that. And there's a lot of humility to grief, because we aren't who we usually are. And so that's the other tip, is try not to reference who you used to be or what it used to be like. Some things will go back into harmony and balance on the other side of the healing of the grief, of the passage. But we are different, and we want to give ourselves that space to be different, because that's the gift of grief. Actually, there's absolutely a gift in grief, and the gift is we do grow and we do expand and we do gain things if we want to claim them. We definitely can gain more love, more depth, more compassion, more connectivity, more caring, more kindness. So when we can just allow ourselves to be in that process, then we can show up for ourselves or another, if we're supporting another, with the authenticity of the acceptance that it is what it is at this current time. It won't be like this forever. And most of the time, through really intense, heavy grief, we cannot see what's on the other side. And there will definitely be dark days where we might feel like it's never going to be okay again. And again, just allowing ourselves to be in that and supporting ourselves as gently and as lovingly as possible. So, invitation is regardless of if you're currently going through a grief, there are a lot of people right now going through a lot of grief. And so if it resonates, just even once in a while lighting a candle for somebody, or for somebody across the world that's experiencing war, or that's experiencing these ravaged fires, or experiencing death, and they're alone. Say they live alone and they've lost their partner after, say, 60 years or 40 years, and they're alone and they don't have anyone. So sometimes we can light a candle, or we can just set an intention or set a prayer to them. Just anybody who's open to receiving grace, love, just this compassion that, there's people out here that care. Sometimes sending that out can be just an absolutely beautiful, impactful, and very powerful gift that we can bless others, and we're blessed through that process as well. And if you are going through grief, know that you are loved, and know that it's okay to honor yourself, and it will pass, and you will be different, and that's okay too. No words, just love. All right, have a beautiful day. Namaste.